Alison, you're in good company today as a movement specialist.
I think it's amazing that osteoporosis and bone density are becoming a more prominent part of the conversation in the movement world. I think it has up until recently been a very, well, we don't really need to worry about that all that much because it's just those older women over there who have that as an issue. And we're over here being strong and active. And I think it's fantastic that we're starting to have these conversations more widely.
Yeah, I think so too. A marginalized group is now getting more recognition, which is the theme that I hope keeps growing in all areas of life. Anyone marginalized that has such a great contribution they can make to the communities need to be heard.
Yeah.
So Susan wants to know about any tools to improve bone density. And Sylvia is talking about her severe osteoporosis. And so Sylvia, you're right. You're in the right spot with all the proactive steps you're taking. So I don't know if you can read her comment there about as she ramps up her exercises. Yeah. Good. Alison, you're on it. Carly, you're always expanding your knowledge. It's one of the things I admire about you is how expansive you are. All right, I think it's time for us to get started. So thank you for being here. Welcome. I didn't really pay attention to my bones. I have broken a few and they happen to be the same bones over and over, which were funny enough or not funny enough because they're very painful when you break them. Toes. So I've broken my small toe on each foot a couple of times and then a middle toe. And I won't get into how that happens or happened. Knock on wood, it's not going to happen again. I just noticed when I started fencing, as I was approaching, I was 60, and I was not doing the footwork correctly, and I was putting too much pressure on my back foot, which is your anchor foot, and acquired a stress fracture because I was pounding it constantly. And I was thinking to myself, that kind of pounding, like, really? That's going to give me a stress fracture. And so I immediately got some help, got some new coaches, found out how to change my footwork, healed without having to have medical intervention of any sort, like no cast, no boot. And I was able to continue to fence with some real practical people on my side, a PT and some other folks who assisted me. That really woke me up. And a lot of movement for a lot of us. So many of us on this call, and those of you who are going to come on and listen later, movement gives you a sense of self. It does for me. I know it does for Alison. I know it does for Carly, those of you I know on this call. By moving in our body, some of us are more kinesthetically connected to ourselves. And so we feel like ourselves when we're moving. And then to have that taken away is kind of like a personal prison and a loss of identity. And so we all have these obstacles, and some of us want to know, how do we overcome them? Sometimes we have to use radical acceptance, which kind of sucks sometimes. And sometimes we have tools and things that we can do to be proactive. And I feel like for any challenge like this that can be debilitating if we don't pay attention to it, we're often very wise, at least I'm feeling it from me and those I work with. We're wise when we do have a blend of radical acceptance, and you can look it up and Google it and go to YouTube and find some wonderful presentations, especially from Dr. Ramani on it. Radical acceptance with some proactivity can give you a recipe for a new lease on life, a new outlook, and we know that it's mindset. And so we'll probably talk more about that as we wind down mindset and relationship and community. So Alison, I just want to start by saying that I'm so delighted to do this with you. I've had the pleasure of going to Toronto, spending time in Alison's home, in her Pilates studio, walking across the street and having a couple of meals at a diner, and just enjoying Toronto in general as I got to meet her in person. And she is a dynamic, intelligent human being, one who has an incredible means of articulating information to us in a way that we can absorb it easily and use it quickly. She is a master at that. She's a great coach. She's a great osteoporosis coach. She's a very empathic and even more so compassionate human being. She has great boundaries. And I love that she has a diverse life with being on the water during a part of her life and being on land. So with that, Alison, you are the content expert here, and I'm just going to ask you anything you want to add to that intro, and tell us, what is osteoporosis? Define that for us.
Well, I'll tell you that part of the reason that I have reasonably okay boundaries is thanks to Lynn, who was a big part of me learning how to have boundaries as an adult. So thank you, Lynn. Lynn is also a fantastic human, and meeting you in person was truly one of the best experiences. I had this amazing moment where we had seen each other and seen video and seen pictures, and then we walked up and saw each other in person, and it was just like meeting a best friend. It was the most delightful moment ever. And I'm thrilled to be here. I think this is an incredibly important and valuable conversation, and so I'm really glad people are here. And so I'm going to guess that most of you who are here have osteoporosis or osteopenia, but there may be some of you who are here as trainers or movement people, or just out of curiosity, because you'll do anything that Lynn offers. So I'll just give you a quick definition of osteoporosis. Osteoporosis is a condition of low bone density that leads to a higher risk of fracture. And that's it. That's the diagnosis. It's very non-specific. And there is no specific cause. So osteoporosis can be a primary condition that can be a result of any number of things, genetics, behaviors, but it can also be a secondary condition. So it can be a result of medication. It can be connected to other conditions. Rheumatoid arthritis is one of them. They're not the same condition, but they often coexist. So it's complicated, and there are no simple answers when it comes to osteoporosis. It's a very complex condition, and it varies widely from person to person. Osteoporosis in and of itself is not painful. So you can have osteoporosis your whole life, and if you've never been scanned and never broken anything, you may never even know that you have it. And that's where the higher risk of fracture part becomes so important, because fractures typically do hurt and can be quite life-changing for some people. And so there's a real focus for a lot of people on increasing bone density, but I would argue that in addition to that, a really primary thing we want to keep on top of is having really great balance and avoiding fractures. Living a life that doesn't put us in a position where we're more likely to fracture, and doing all the things that we can to build good bone quality and good bone strength, as well as balance.
Can we just stop on that for just a second, Alison?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think we use this term, and a lot of us internalize it and associate it with equilibrium and balance in life. And you are literally talking about exercises and routines where you learn to have better balance. And that starts at the feet up, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So we all tend to lose everybody's balance starts to diminish around the age of 40. So even if you have relatively good balance or even really good balance, it is absolutely worth investing some time for everybody in improving balance and improving agility and coordination.
Yeah. In fact, that was the premise by which I left triathlons. Was I noticed that I was recruiting only large muscles, and it was go, go, go. And I was losing coordination, flexibility, and agility, and balance. Because swimming, running, biking for hours and hours and hours doesn't necessarily enhance those. So let's go through those again. What are the things that we want to focus on just with the balance part? Just give us a few details.
So we're looking for stability. So those would tend to be things like the ability to stand still, the ability to be responsive. So if you picture standing with both feet really solidly on the ground, and then somebody pushing you as hard as they can, and you have the ability to stay centered and grounded and not fall until the point where you do. And then as you start to lose your balance, you have the ability to come back.
Okay.
And then you also want dynamic balance, which would be the ability to move around and do complex and complicated things. Well, I actually have a couple of little balance exercises we can do at the end.
Yeah.
And so that lends more into the agility and coordination part of things. But in the long run, both of those things work together to allow you not only your everyday life with confidence, but it also allows you to stay active in terms of sports and hobbies and the things that we want to be able to do. If you're at a higher risk of fracture, you really want to be able to maintain, if you want to keep skiing or you want to keep skating or you want to keep doing things that have a slightly higher risk of falling, you really want to work on those, on that little trifecta of balance, kind of stable balance, dynamic balance, agility, and coordination.
Okay. That's the trifecta right there. Okay. Thank you. I work with people day in and day out, and I'm kind of a best self whisperer and bringing out their badass, most formidable self. And I know when we hit movement and body coordination, and even the fact that somebody is afraid, and I have clients who have osteoporosis, there's this fragility that they feel that's not like, they feel old before their time. And not in a good way, not like with the wisdom and perspective, but of feeling less than. So talk about what happens when you get that diagnosis, or just talk to that dynamic, would you, Alison?
Yeah, this is something I hear over that phrase of old before my time comes up over and over and over again. And interestingly, it comes up in people of every age. So I have clients, I'm only 57. I have fairly severe osteoporosis, and I went through that phase. But I have clients who will tell me in their 80s that they feel old before their time. Like, we have often a really amazing sense of ourselves as dynamic and busy and vibrant and active and youthful, regardless of our chronological age. And then getting this diagnosis can make that can really kind of blow that out of the water for a while.
Yeah.
I don't think that the way the information is conveyed is typically particularly supportive. I'm very pro medical community. I have a fantastic doctor. I think doctors do the best they can. Generally, they're using the tools they have at their disposal, but most doctors are not osteoporosis specialists, and they tend to present the information in a very, sometimes in a very cavalier way. So you're just left with this not enough information, but some of them will be very like, you could break a bone while you're sneezing. You shouldn't pick up anything heavy. You shouldn't wear high heels. And it's very disempowering.
Yeah.
And it leaves people with this real sense that they've lost that magic spark. They've lost that badass self. They've lost the thing that makes them strong and special and amazing. And I think that's incredibly difficult, because it doesn't have to be true. There are absolutely there are risks. I mean, we are at higher risk of fracture, and I know some of you in this call have fractured things, and I know some of you are in a fairly severe condition where the risk of fracture is very real. And so part of the work, part of the mindset that you were talking about, Lynn, becomes about connecting to potential and possibility and building a resilience in the face of risk, and figuring out what is your sensible decision-making process, where you say, this is what I'm going to do to support my bones, whether that's a medication or a movement or a nutrition combination. These are the things I'm going to avoid. These are the things I'm going to dive into with all of my heart and soul, because I know they really work for me.
Yeah.
And whether that's, a meditation practice, or whether that's a coaching practice, or whether that is, becoming incredibly well-informed about the most current research, like finding the tools that help you stay connected and centered to the fact that you still are a strong, active, vibrant, awesome human who also happens to have this thing, right? We are not our osteoporosis. We are not our bone density. We are more than that.
Right.
And that often takes some time to reconnect to. The first phases after diagnosis tend to be very destabilizing.
Yes, I would imagine it would throw the autonomic nervous system into some kind of fight or flight, freeze. Um, so let's talk to that really quick. I want to just set some context for those of you on the call. And I don't even know that you know these statistics, Allison, because they're so particular to some of the things I do. I work, part of my program is to bring out the best stuff in people so they can leverage it. And what I found are a lot of people, because I've done this about 7 or 8 times, they come in when they want to reinvent their identity and have their best self lead that career identity change or that personal identity change. And so that's a big transition. And I even run into 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds who think they're too old for something, like they've missed the bus. And so those of us who are like me, I'm 64, you look at someone like that and go, you need some perspective here. But let me give you a study. This comes out of the New England Journal of Medicine. So be thinking in terms of decades, 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50. On just on this cue, take a moment, each of you, and tell me, what do you think they found was the most productive decade in a human being's life? And then hold that number. So it would be like 20 to 29, 30 to 39, 40 to 49. Here are the answers. 60 to 69 was the most productive era. And we have a lot of wisdom. We've come to a peak in some of our careers. We still have a lot of vitality. And if we have the right mindset, we still do a lot with ourselves. The second was 70 to 79. Because if we live through those 60s that healthy, we're going to take it into the 70s with us. And then the third was the 50 to 59 as you approach that 60. So life, yes. And then by the time you're 80, it's like, hey, you deserve to rest, relax, and do whatever you want, or keep working. You get to choose. But those are statistics that tell us that if we keep self-authorship, if we keep self-care, and something you just said, Allison, which is find someone, or some of you are really good at studying. Like, I'm impressed. I'm one of those people who needs connection in order to make change. And I was just talking or listening to Dr. Ramani and one of her guests this morning about how we need relationship and connection with someone in order to make big changes. And that's why the world of coaching that Alison and I work in, and Carly as well, we're in that world. And Sylvia, I think you're in that world too, where we build relationship with our clients so that they have that support. And if any of you are single like I am, and you're on your own, sometimes that's the most supportive connection you have, is somebody who believes in you while you're making these changes with your body, with your mind, with your career. And we need that. A good book to read is Social by Matt Lieberman. And Shannon, would you put that in the link? That tells us that Maslow had the hierarchy wrong, that food, water, shelter, yes, are important for sustaining life, but connection is the most important. And today you're connecting with one of the experts on the North American continent, which is Alison. And what we're going to do is ask her, now that we know that if we have somebody who can help us make the good decisions, and some of you can study on your own and come up with just as many good decision-making processes as those of us who need connection with another person to make those decisions, find your way through it. But Alison is going to give you some of that practical, science-based knowledge today of what you can do. So the question is, what are the ways we can take charge of OP, osteoporosis?
Okay. So there are a million things that we can do here, but we're gonna for the sake of brevity and for staying in my scope of practice, we're gonna limit it. I do want
You're
to
gonna stay here. You're gonna stay in your integrity today. That's a core value.
It is in fact.
Yeah.
We're going to touch quickly on medication, which is not, it's a big discussion. It's a very personal decision. And I get asked it a lot. Should I take medication? Do you take medication? Tell me about medication. So it's not in my scope to counsel anybody as to whether they should or should not take medication. And this is where having a good relationship with your doctor is really important. Here are the questions that I counsel my clients to ask if they're unsure about whether they want to take medication or not, which is, to talk to your doctor. And I always say also talk to your pharmacist. Pharmacists are a fantastic source of information that we often don't leverage. So you go to your doctor says, you have osteoporosis, you should take medication, here's your prescription, and gets ready to leave the room. And so you say, hang on just a second. Why am I specifically a good candidate for medication? Because osteoporosis comes in big ranges. And so you might want to be talking about that. Why is this particular medication a good one for me? What are the side effects and how common are they? Because you'll hear stuff on the internet that makes it sound like some medications, you can't take them without side effects, and that is not always the case. Are there any possible contraindications with other medication that I'm taking? And that's a very good one to take to your pharmacist as well. How long will I take the medication, and will I transition to a different medication after that? Right. And then that gives you really good, solid base from which to make your decisions. And you don't need to make decisions immediately. Osteoporosis tends to be a slow moving condition. So don't get pressured into making decisions right away. And that's what I will say about medication. It can be a life-changing benefit for many, many people. And many people do not have any side effects. So just because that always comes up. So I thought I would just get it out of the way. Nutrition is a huge part of maintaining our bone health. And I am not a nutritionist, and I am not certified to talk about nutrition. So there you go. That's what I can tell you about that. If anybody wants, I can talk about what I do, but it's pretty simple and straightforward. And then the big part, which I can talk to you about, is exercise. And this is where this part of the mindset thing comes into play, because it can be really scary to think about your bones breaking or fracturing when you have a life. And so when we think about exercise, we think about moving, and moving becomes frightening. And so people often stop moving. And unfortunately, that is the worst thing that we can do, because people with osteoporosis need to move more, not less. One of the things that we know is that stimulation of the bones is a key way in which we generate more bone cells. And we generate them through a combination of many, many things, but amongst other things, what I think of as squish, which is compression. So some of you will have heard the term compression fractures and think of compression as a bad thing. And this is two separate uses of the word compression. So in this case, it's sort of ground force reaction. It's the pressure of your body against the ground and gravity coming down from above. And you get lots of compression, and it stimulates the bone cells, makes them go, oh, there's more load here. We should build more bone cells in order to withstand the load. And then what's called torsional load, which is the pull of strong muscle on the bones. Same thing. You get lots of strong muscle pull. The bones respond by growing more bone cells. And so we really want to engage in exercise in order to create those loads that stimulate the bones. And it's different. And this is where osteoporosis becomes so complicated, because there is no single answer. For those of you who've heard of the Liftmore trial, this was a study that was done in Australia, and they explored the idea that people with osteoporosis can actually manage heavy lifting, heavy weights. There was really good outcome from the trial, but they did not have people with, existing fractures in that trial. They didn't have people with really advanced osteoporosis in that trial. So there are no answers that apply to everybody. And so that is a thing to keep in mind. And so somebody who has a low fracture risk or a moderate fracture risk and no fracture history is going to be quite different than somebody who, knows that they are prone to frequent fractures, or even somebody who just has one or two fractures in their history. But that said, everybody can exercise. Everybody can move more. We just scale it to match wherever you are and whatever your exercise history is, right? So somebody who's been very sedentary, we're not starting them with, 100-pound deadlifts. And I think people are looking on the internet right now and going, exercise is scary. The stuff I need to do for my bones is like huge and overwhelming. And in fact, that is absolutely not the case. We start from where you are. And in fact, some studies have shown bones really like to be surprised. I like to anthropomorphize my bone cells. They like novelty, they like novel stimulation. And so for people who've been quite sedentary, they actually can be the ones who get the greatest increase in bone density because their bone cells are being surprised a lot. Right? So if you feel like I haven't been exercising and I can't start now and it's all too much, in fact, you are the person who's going to get the most amount of benefit from not an overwhelming amount of exercise. So if that can be encouraging to anybody, that would be almost like my number one message. If you don't normally exercise, you can start small and get really good outcome. And you do want somebody to help you, whether that's a trainer or a coach or going to the gym and working with somebody there, physiotherapist. You do want some guidance. But yeah, you can get really good. You can get really good benefit. There are particular ways we really want to focus our time and our attention. Different countries have different proportions, but the general agreement is we want to do at least 2 sessions of balance and functional training per week. We want to do at least 2 sessions of strength training per week, which includes your arms, your legs, your chest and shoulders, your hips, your back, right? Kind of the traditional basics. And then you want to most days, not every day, but most days you want to be doing some degree of moderate to vigorous activity. And that's where you're getting walking, hiking, running, jogging, fencing, yoga, Pilates, dancing. Dancing's a really good one. Dancing is great because you go in, fencing would be good too, actually, because you go in lots of different directions. Because your bones like to be surprised, doing the same thing in the same way for a long time, you start to lose the bone building effect fairly quickly. So going for a 1-hour walk on flat pavement, you're losing the bone building benefit fairly quickly, but dancing or fencing or hiking so that you're going on different kind of having to sidestep here and step higher here, you get the bone benefit goes on for longer because you keep changing the directions and the loads.
It's really interesting about the bones wanting the novelty.
Yeah, it's
Because
fascinating.
because for human beings to grow, we need novelty. So it's interesting that our bones are so human.
Yeah. And I think so this isn't an osteoporosis specific thing, but I think we tend to think of bones as being these kind of dry, brittle, hard things, but living bone is smooth and has like a slicker surface to it and has the like our bones are all built with spirals in them. Even your like long straight bones, they're not in straight lines, right? So doing dissection, you get the chance to see not living bone, but sort of closer to living bone than what we think of when we see like a preserved skeleton. And it's an incredibly dynamic collagen filled substance. And so if you really can think of your bones as having some give, and we want to move in different directions because we know much less about the science of bone quality and bone strength than we do about bone density, and they're not quite the same thing. So bone strength and bone quality is kind of about the way your bone cells are laid out. So bone density is how many bone cells do you have? Bone strength and quality are dictated in part by the architecture of those bone cells, right? So if you think of a bridge, you want bridges that have triangulation, that have a variety of angles. That makes the bridge strong. We want the same thing in our bones. And we're starting to develop the technology that can measure that. But the science is suggesting that that's part of the value in doing lots of different activities, is that your bones are pulled on in many different directions by using lots of different muscles. Right. And that torsional load, that pull of the muscles on the bones, is happening in ways that pull many different angles into the bone cells, sort of.
Yeah.
Not the most precise way of describing it, but does that make sense?
It does make sense. And anyone who has, excuse me, my morning voice, anyone who has is a meat eater, a carnivore, if you've had a fresh piece of steak or something, you can see more of the quality of the bone. You have more of appreciation of what you're talking about, Allison. Go more into that thing about different countries have different proportions. Tell us about, because we do have people coming from different continents today. Can you dive into that a little bit?
Um, we don't, I think, as I said earlier, because it's such a complex condition, we don't really have, there is, there are just a lot of different ways of thinking about osteoporosis. And different countries are kind of at different levels of updating their best practices. And the science really comes down to, we have some pretty good ideas, but we don't really know. So Osteoporosis Canada puts balance first. Osteoporosis Canada really focuses hard on fracture avoidance. And so when it comes to the proportions of exercise, we say focus on that balance and functional movement first. That's your number one focus. And then strength training is your number two focus. And then weight bearing exercise is your number three focus, with kind of a little extra attention being paid to upper back exercises. But the UK puts strength training first and balance second. So the proportions at the moment tend to be fairly similar in terms of like at least a couple of sessions a week of this, at least a couple of sessions a week of that. Some people are saying, 5 days a week, half an hour. Some people are saying 150 minutes a week of the other exercise. It's tending, for the countries that are paying attention to osteoporosis, it's trending in the same direction, but there's just slightly different values put on the different elements and components. And I don't know that we can say any one of them is right or wrong. We don't know enough. And some of it, again, is going to come down to personal choice. So again, for somebody who is prone to spontaneous compression fractures, so osteoporosis can involve what are called low trauma fractures. So I have a client who ended up with a lower spinal fracture just stepping off a 2-inch step. She didn't fall, she just stepped down and something went awry. So when you have you fall, but you fall from a standing height, you fall from less than the height of one step, is called a low trauma fracture. So most people don't fracture when that happens, they just walk it off. And you can also have what's called a silent compression fracture, which is where typically your spine, just the bone is fragile enough that it just compresses, and you end up with this kind of, your bones are typically in your vertebrae or rectangles. So you can end up with a wedge fracture where the front of the bone comes down. And sometimes like up to 60% of compression fractures are silent. You don't even know you've had them. They're not like a moment. They just kind of happen and you end up with an uncomfortable back. So for people like that, the balance work truly is the number one thing, because they need to not fall. And because, yes, they need to exercise and they do need to strength train and they do need to do upper back strength, but it's not going to be, those people are not going to be putting barbells across their shoulders. They're not going to feel safe doing that. So we have to work on different ways for them to strength train. For somebody who is, 65 years old, has a long history of vigorous exercise, is at low risk of fracture, has never had a fracture, go, do the thing, do the progressive overload training, right? So part of the kind of the National Osteoporosis Society guidelines, also you just have to look at them and apply them to your own personal experience.
Right. And that's where my trainer comes in. She specializes in maturing athletes who are competitive like I am, and really does take into consideration all the things that our bones need. And I'm telling this because if you are in that age and you are wanting to be more active, a physio, someone like Alison is great to have on your sideline, and somebody who can help you with the nutrition and the training. So they write the program for you. It is just really wonderful to follow steps and know your bones are getting everything they need in a 7-day span. and then that turns over and there's a new set of activities. So
Yeah.
having people on your sideline.
I just
Yeah.
actually want to say, I realize mostly what we're doing right now is we're talking about people who already have osteoporosis or osteopenia. So just to be clear, everything that applies to osteoporosis also applies to osteopenia. But it also applies to people who are not experiencing bone loss. So if you have good bone density and your goal is to avoid getting osteoporosis, you really do want to dive into strength training. You really do want to work on your balance. Balance exercises also strengthen your hips, they strengthen your core, they strengthen your feet. Like, you really can't lose with balance exercises. But what we are learning about bone density is often based on studies that are done on people who don't have osteoporosis, and they see when we do the strength training, we see an increase in bone density. That effect may not be the same for people who have osteoporosis already. But if you're here and you are interested in avoiding bone loss, then you really do want to go the strength training route. It's incredibly helpful.
You know, you want a program, you want something, and somebody looking at all aspects. Yes, so that's Debbie. Yes.
Yeah.
So let me just tell you very quickly who I have on my team. I have a massage therapist that I see about every 4 to 5 weeks. I have a physio that I see about every 7 weeks, unless there's an injury. And then I do acupuncture regularly, plus a trainer. And I have a Whole30 program for eating. And so I have all of these different people supporting me. Yes, I am competitive. Yes, I'm working hard to get on a international podium someday with my fencing. I will tell you though, you don't have to have some kind of crazy competitive goal in some sport to have a team around you that guides you. So you're not guessing, because this is your health. This is your longevity. This is you being able to enjoy the life you have. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah.
Alison, looking at the time, where do you want to take us next? Because I know you have some demonstrations, you have some other things. What should we jump into now? Because I know there are going to be some questions too.
Yeah. So one of the things I think that is a real stopper for people is they don't know how they're supposed to move safely. And so I just want to quickly go over the limitations and recommendations about movement. So because we have this lower bone density, which is systemic, right? They measure certain parts, but it's all over. There's 4 movements we really want to pay attention to. There is flexion of your spine. So forward curving of your spine, coming this way, puts a lot of pressure on the vertebrae. So we're limiting that under certain circumstances, which I'm going to tell you about in a minute. Rotation, side bending, and compound movements, which is where you're putting 2 of those together. So if you can imagine, like, here's a pile of boxes and you're putting them in your car and you roll forward to pick up the box and then you twist to put it in the car, right? So compound motion. Those are the 3 direct movements in the combination that we want to notice. And life does not mean that we eliminate them completely, but there are certain circumstances that we want to pay attention to. So we're not doing those shapes in a sustained way. So we're not staying in that position. So if you think of a yoga forward fold, we're not doing that, because then we're putting the spine into flexion, just hanging out there. It's putting a lot of pressure on the vertebrae, or like lying on your back and twisting your legs all the way over and hanging out there. So we want to avoid staying in those positions for a long time. We want to avoid weighted flexion, rotation, and side bending. So that could be lying on your back and doing a roll up in Pilates, or doing a sit up, right? Because you're weighted with your own body weight, or kind of in everyday life, rounding forward with heavy groceries, or in the gym doing a Jefferson curl, right? Where you're holding a heavy weight and rolling down forward and rolling back up. Too much weight on the spine. Weighted in terms of side bending, like you wouldn't want to be holding a kettlebell in one hand and side bending, too much pressure. We want to avoid rapid and forceful movements, because then it's very hard to gauge the precision with which you're moving. And then a big one to me is end range. We don't want to go as far as we can in those directions, And that to me is one of the biggest arguments for maintaining your capacity, certainly in rotation and side bending, because your life involves those movements, right? So my favorite example is if you drive, you need to check your blind spot. Huge health risks involved in not checking your blind spot. So we want to make sure that this is not your end range amount of rotation. And the only way we do that is by continuing to move in rotation, but mindfully and intentionally, and avoiding that sustained, rapid, forceful, weighted end range motion. So it's not that we're eliminating those movements, we're just being very intentional about how we use them. And then that leads into my favorite exercise, which is hip hinging, because it is both an exercise, like a strengthening, hip strengthening exercise, but it's also how we can move through our everyday life without spinal flexion. So I'm going to just pop my camera up. So hip hinging is where you, I think you can't see, well, you can just see my head. So hip hinging is where we hinge, right? Bend, fold at your hips without bending your spine. So if you think of something as simple as scraping a plate into the garbage, right? At the end of your, you've had your dinner and you're putting stuff into the green bin, how typical it is to do this, right? Or loading the dishwasher or picking up the laundry or like any number of things. And we just bend like this. We want to instead practice until it becomes a habit, this idea of keeping your spine long, which means you need to work on your hip mobility to be able to come down and get something up off the floor without bending your spine, which has the benefit of strengthening your hips and your legs. It's great for your pelvic floor, just as a little side benefit. And it strengthens your back muscles, right? Because you're using your back muscles to maintain this long spine. So this is the kind of everyday, this is something that you could work on if you were not accustomed to exercising and being a real mover, is learning how to hinge your hips. But then you can also then transition that into an exercise with load, because we do in fact really want to add weight to our lives, whether we're squatting or deadlifting or lunging, right? You do want to use that hip hinge as a working loaded activity. And how much weight you use, of course, is going to be totally scaled to your existing strength. And when we talk about strength training, for anybody, but particularly for us, the key is you have to continue to increase the challenge. Sorry, Candace is just saying 39. Oops, I lost you, Candace.
Okay, I'll read it to you. So this
Okay.
conversations appeals to me. I love taking proactive measures now to have longevity in my health. I have 12 vertebrae fused, scoliosis correction, and a 14 mid-thoracic through mid-lumbar. So I have big concerns about my lower spine as I age. Thank you for noting your suggestions apply as proactive measures.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. So Candace, you would for sure be a person where you would benefit from having at least some sessions with a physio or a personal trainer who has like lots of training in managing exercise with fusions. And you can for sure be very proactive with your bone health. So in order for strength training to be effective for bone health, you have to keep increasing the challenge. You have to keep increasing your weight, whether you're doing body weight or resistance bands or weights. You have to keep surprising your bones, right? This is part of that, giving them novelty, giving them new information. In this context is about increasing the weight and making the pull of the muscle on the bone stronger, so that you continue to get that, oh, something new is happening effect. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about I have two other little exercises for you. One is balance, because I happen to be in the category of balance is really, really key. I believe balance is the number one thing that you want to work on. There's the possibility you may be able to increase bone density through intense exercise. That's not going to be possible for everybody, but improving balance is possible for everyone. So this is called a tandem stance. So tandem stance is where you put your feet directly one in front of the other. You can do a tandem stance where you have space between your heel and your toes, or you can bring your heel and your toes all the way together. And for some people, just this is an excellent exercise. It's all you need to work on. You can feel your ankles shifting and moving. You can feel your feet shifting and moving and your foot muscles grabbing onto the floor. You want to use your inner thighs and your outer thighs, right, to pull your legs together. So for some people, and I will just say, anytime you're doing balance work, no matter how good you think your balance is, it can be useful to do it close to a wall or a chair or a solid piece of furniture, so you have something to grab onto if you need it. And then you can scale this up. So you can scale it by adding a motion, right? So you could add a twist, not an end range twist, of course. You can add a head turn. So your eyes are really implicated in your balance. So if you're changing your eye line, that's going to increase the balance challenge. You can do something else, right? So you can throw a ball from hand to hand. I'm blind in one eye, so this becomes very challenging for me, right? So you're doing an extra activity while holding your tandem stance. The other thing is make sure you try it with both feet in the forward position, because you'll have a dominant side that will be easier and a non-dominant side that will be harder. You can take this into motion. You cannot step on your medicine ball while you do it. So you can go forward. You can look forward. If you want to get really challenging, you can do this with your eyes closed. You can go backwards, right? So you can do all kinds of things to scale that tandem stance into tandem motion to meet your, what do you need to do to challenge your balance? And then the last one is, one of the exercises that we want to do is an overhead press. And this really does a great job of strengthening your back and shoulder muscles. But if you can't get your arm overhead, that's a problem. So really working on keeping your core on. So your stomach muscles, your back muscles, your lats, your hips, planting your feet into the floor. Put one hand on your chest. You can either make a fist or spread out your fingers so that your hand is very active and dynamic. And practice bringing your arm overhead without moving anything else. And then you can take your arm out and back and make a big circle, but without moving anything else. Because often what happens is, if we have limited shoulder motion, I don't know if you can see with this shirt on. You start to bring your arm overhead, you're good. And then at a certain point, you've reached your shoulder limit. And then we outsource the movement into the mid-back, and your whole rib cage pops forward. And now this is no longer a shoulder motion, it's a combination of a shoulder and spine motion, which is, you know, if that's your movement habit, it's going to end up putting a lot of pressure on your back. But once you add weight to that and you have low bone density, it's not an ideal combination. So before you're getting into loading with big weight, really playing with the shapes you're going to take that weight into without the load first is a really, really good strategy. And again, especially if you're one of the people who has not been active, you don't even need to start with a weight. You don't even need to start with a resistance band. Just create a little internal resistance and start playing with the movement and figuring out how you can move those joints. Joint mobility is hugely important for all of us, but particularly if you have bone density issues.
Right. And I would encourage people to start tracking. So if you're just starting today, notice how far you go. If you're doing it without any weights in your hands or any resistance, note that. And then the next time you try it, see if there's a little bit of a stretch. And you will see that curve that Allison's talking about. It happens over and over in anything physical. If you have been more sedentary, you get greater gains at the beginning, and then your gains get more incremental over time. And that's the same case for even those of us who are very active. We try something new, the new thing gets greater gains until we've done it for a while, and then we may only be able to add a little bit of weight or a little further distance or something. So measuring it, tracking it helps you see your progress, and that can be very motivating. So Allison, what else do we need to cover today before we open up for questions?
I think I've covered my list.
Okay, I think we have covered the list. I really don't have anything else, but I'm going to share my screen and share with you as you're formulating questions that you have. I want to share my screen and show you how to stay in touch or next steps if you're very, very interested in connecting with Allison. You really do want to follow her. She has a Facebook group. I love following her on Instagram. Those of us who are visual thinkers tend to be on Instagram. Those of you who are into the groups, you like to be on Facebook. There's a free 5-day guide. So I think, can they go to your Instagram and get that guide, or do they have to go right?
Yeah. So if you go to Instagram and hit the link in bio, it gives you a whole bunch of different options. I do have a paid program. I have a 3-month program. Sylvia has been in my program. And so if anybody is interested in that, you can find out about that there. And I offer a free mentorship call for anybody who's interested in the program and wants to get some more details and kind of see if it's a good fit for them. And that contact information is also in my Instagram link. But the 5-day guide is a great place to get started. It's not, so if you have a really rigorous exercise practice now, the exercises in the 5-day guide are going to feel a bit underwhelming. But the key would be to really look at them through a lens of what can I change? What can I add? What can I modify to make my movement practice both safe and productive and interesting and engaging? And if you're new to exercise, so then there's some scaling in there, right? So if you're new to exercise, it's okay. They're all good for you too.
Okay, and I'm going to ask Shannon, who's on our call that runs our office here, to sign up and get those for both she and I. Although we do have our own exercise routines, I want to add what you have here, especially the balance. Yeah. So are there some questions? Anyone that has a question, you can come off mute and talk directly to Allison. You can raise your hand, and you can also put it in the chat. We have about 7 more minutes till we're to the half hour, and we would love to hear from you.
We have all the options.
All the options, that's right. And Allison, you brought back to me how important balance is.
Yeah, it's a big thing.
Yeah.
Is Tai Chi good for bone strengthening? So Tai Chi is great. The balance thing is really key, right? So there's lots of balance opportunities in Tai Chi. I'm not a Tai Chi practitioner myself. I do know that there are lots of people who like Tai Chi for bone health. There's a lot of hip strength, which is useful, and you're going in different directions, which is useful. You're not getting that additional progressive strength training element, but that's okay. We're looking for multiple activities. If you're doing any kind of vigorous landing, you're getting impact through your bones, which is good. That vibration is one of the things we didn't talk about. The science is not conclusive, but it would seem that varying degrees of impact are helpful. And it would definitely fall into that category of sort of the other weight bearing exercises that we want to do in combination with the strength training. It seems to be the combination that's the most effective. Strength training and balance training together. I think it's a 34% decrease in fall risk. but strength training alone doesn't particularly decrease fall risk. Balance training alone is like I can't remember this number, but I think it's more like a 23% lowering in fall risk, but strength training and balance training together really effective. Weight bearing exercise, so that would be Tai Chi, walking, running, jumping, hiking, has some limited benefit. Strength training and weight bearing exercises together have more benefits. So combining your Tai Chi into a balance and strength training combo would be an absolute winner. Are compression fractures always painful or sometimes silent? They are sometimes silent. They are not always painful. There are people who have compression fractures who don't know that they've happened, and they're diagnosed by X-ray. So a DEXA scan measures your bone density, and it may or may not pick up fractures. In fact, I've heard tales of people who come out of a DEXA saying, oh, my bone density has improved enormously but only in one area in my spine. And then they go for an X-ray and it turns out their bone density has increased because the bone has been compressed, because they've had a silent compression fracture. So the bone looks denser, but not in the way that we want. Yeah, so X-ray fractures, it's definitely, that's the best way to identify them. Some DEXAs will perhaps notice a fracture, but it's not a guarantee. Starting to offer a seated dance class, cool. And wondered in what way it might be helpful to osteoporosis, even though we're not loading our weight through our hips because we're not standing. Yeah, I would love to talk about that. So I think the benefit there would be that would be more in that maintaining all of the ranges of motion category, right? Because presumably you're going to be moving in lots of different directions. You're maintaining shoulder mobility. So one of the things I actually forgot to mention was the focus on a little extra focus on upper back strength is very supportive of posture and alignment. And that can help to avoid hyperkyphosis, which is the forward curving of the spine. Forward curving of the spine can lead to compression fractures. So the seated chair dancing, that is for sure going to give you lots of opportunities for seated extension and upper back work, keeping lots of openness in the front of your chest and shoulders. Super, super helpful. Thank you for coming, Susan.
Yeah. Catherine has another question.
Climbing stairs. Yeah. So climbing stairs is great because, again, that would fall into that weight bearing exercise category. And you're getting a little bit more drive if you're doing good stair climbing, right? So if you're keeping your body reasonably upright and you're driving from your hips rather than kind of leaning forward and driving from your thighs, you're getting extra strength into your posterior and lateral hip muscles, which gives you just that little extra bit of push, right? If you can think of the little bit of land onto the step, and then if you're really imagine you're having to really push your body weight up to get to the next step, stair climbing is good. Hill climbing also great. And hill climbing, of course, is less steep than stairs. So if you find stairs hard on your knees, finding a bit of a slope and hill climbing is, again, it's more stimulating than walking on flat level ground.
Yeah, and a lot of times we can find that incline at a park. We don't even have to go to the mountains. Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So in Canada, there's the Bone Fit certification, which is offered by Osteo Canada. It's a pretty rigorous training, and they're actually just coming out with a new updated training. It's not available outside of Canada, though. I'm not actually sure what the certification is in the States, because I don't know a lot of people in the States saying, hey, here's this great training. Mostly what I hear is, man, there is no training. Sylvia, you might be in a better place to answer that question than I am.
Yeah, I'll answer the question. I am training with Alison, and I'm in the US. So that's my answer. I don't know of anything.
And then there's Mary Beth Finnerty she signed up for Bone Fit USA.
It's
she feels
okay.
Yeah, she feels like it's the USA counterpart.
Okay. So yeah, that would be great. That would
Yeah.
be excellent. Yeah, it's a very good program. Virtual in March, and there are a couple of spots left. Oh, there you go. Excellent. Okay, so Mary Beth, this must be new because you didn't used to be able to get in outside of Canada. And that's great.
That's really great. Yeah, we're catching up with Canada. Thank you. Yeah, you guys are usually ahead in things like this.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, Alison, I looked forward to this for months as we talked about it. And I'm so excited to have you here and to share our networks. I know this is a joint effort between your network and mine. I've learned so many things to keep doing, some new things to start doing, and I'm sure the rest of you have. And I would encourage you to reach out to Alison on the socials, or if you have her email, let her know the value you got for this. I would also let you know in the coming year, in the new year, Carly, who's on, is a movement specialist, and Carly and I are going to be hosting a 5-day movement challenge. So if any of you are interested in that, stay tuned. You can go to Soul Salt and sign up for our newsletter to stay in touch, or find me on socials and DM me so you can see that, because Carly and I will be doing a 5-day challenge on some movement that will segue so beautifully off of what you set us up for, Alison. And again, if you ever get the chance to work with Alison, she not only is a joy, she's an intelligent, compassionate, and a very gifted person who can intuitively and scientifically work with you. So if you haven't worked with her, there is a gift waiting for you to give it to yourself. So thank you, everybody, for being here, being so gracious, and may you have a great rest of your week. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for being here.